On September 3, 1939, Royal Air Force Spitfires patrolled the skies over the Thames Estuary. Britain had declared war on Germany hours earlier. Radar stations along the coast tracked aircraft approaching from the continent. The chain-home radar system could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, giving unprecedented warning of incoming raids. But the radar operators faced a critical problem. The green blips on their screens represented aircraft. But were they British or German? Friend or foe? At approximately 6 in the evening, radar detected aircraft approaching the coast. The plots showed multiple contacts. Fighter controllers scrambled Spitfires to intercept. The pilots climbed to meet what they assumed were German bombers beginning the air war over Britain. They found 2 RAF Blenheim bombers returning from a patrol over the North Sea. One Spitfire pilot, unable to identify the aircraft positively in the fading light, opened fire. Both Blenheims were shot down. 2 crew members died. The war was hours old, and the RAF had already suffered its first friendly fire casualties. The incident illustrated a fundamental problem that would plague air warfare throughout World War II. Radar could detect aircraft but could not identify them. Visual identification required close approach, often too close for safety. Aircraft recognition training helped, but in combat conditions, poor visibility, high speed, stress, even experienced pilots made mistakes. The Blenheim incident was not unique. Throughout the war, hundreds of aircraft would be destroyed by their own side. The losses were not just numerical. They eroded pilot confidence and complicated air operations. A system was needed that could identify friendly aircraft automatically, without requiring visual confirmation. The solution was called IFF, Identification Friend or Foe. The concept was simple. Friendly aircraft would carry a transponder that responded to interrogation signals from ground radar stations. When a radar detected an aircraft, it would simultaneously send an interrogation pulse. If the aircraft was friendly and carried a functioning transponder, it would automatically send back a coded response. The radar operator would see this response on his screen, confirming the aircraft was friendly. Enemy aircraft, lacking the transponder and not knowing the codes, would not respond. The system could not positively identify hostile aircraft, but it could confirm friendly ones. The British developed the first operational IFF system in 1939 and 1940. The initial version, IFF Mark I, was experimental and unreliable. It worked by detecting incoming radar pulses and retransmitting them with modified characteristics. Radar operators could see the modified return and identify it as a friendly response. But the system had serious limitations. It responded to any radar signal on the correct frequency, including German radars. The modifications to the return signal were sometimes too subtle for operators to recognize reliably. And the equipment was temperamental, frequently malfunctioning. The Mark II IFF, introduced in 1940, improved reliability but still responded to any radar on the operating frequency. This created a dangerous vulnerability. If German radar operators could trigger British IFF transponders, they could track British aircraft more easily than with radar alone. The fear was that Germany would exploit this weakness, using captured IFF equipment to build interrogators that would force British aircraft to reveal their positions. The British developed countermeasures, including destroying IFF equipment before capture and changing response codes frequently. But the vulnerability remained. The breakthrough came with IFF Mark III, introduced in 1941 and 1942. This system used a dedicated interrogation frequency separate from radar frequencies. Ground stations transmitted interrogation pulses on a specific frequency. Aircraft transponders listened for these pulses and responded only to interrogations with the correct timing and characteristics. The response was transmitted on a different frequency, making the system a crossband transponder. This design prevented German radars from accidentally triggering British transponders. It also allowed coded responses that could be changed regularly to prevent exploitation. The Mark III system became standard for British and American forces. By 1943, most Allied combat aircraft carried Mark III transponders. The equipment was compact enough to fit in fighters, bombers, and transport aircraft. Installation became routine during aircraft manufacture or retrofit. Pilots received training on IFF operation, though the system required minimal attention in flight. The transponder operated automatically, responding to interrogations without pilot input. The pilot's main responsibility was to ensure the transponder was turned on when appropriate and turned off when flying over enemy territory. The security classification of IFF was extremely high. The British and Americans treated transponders as among the most sensitive equipment in their arsenal. Aircraft carrying IFF were fitted with destruct charges, small explosive devices wired to the transponder unit. If an aircraft crashed or was forced down in enemy territory, the crew was supposed to activate the destruct charge before abandoning the aircraft. Impact switches also triggered the charges automatically in some installations, though these sometimes caused accidents when aircraft made heavy landings. The goal was to prevent Germany from capturing intact transponders and learning the system's technical details. Despite these precautions, Germany did learn about Allied IFF. German intelligence monitored Allied radio frequencies and detected IFF transmissions. German technical intelligence examined crashed Allied aircraft and sometimes recovered IFF components despite destruct charges. German interrogators questioned captured Allied aircrews about IFF procedures. Through these sources, Germany gained understanding of how Allied IFF worked, what frequencies it used, and how responses were coded. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is the story of how IFF technology evolved during World War II. How the British developed the first systems to prevent friendly fire incidents. How the technology spread to American and other Allied forces. How Germany developed its own IFF systems and gained intelligence about Allied versions. How the Allies exploited German IFF to track Luftwaffe aircraft. How operational realities sometimes prevented proper IFF use. And how the fundamental challenge of distinguishing friend from foe shaped air warfare throughout the conflict. Germany developed its own IFF system independently, recognizing the same need that drove British development. The German system was called FUG-25, abbreviated from Funkgerät, meaning radio equipment. The FUG-25 version, introduced in 1940, operated on frequencies compatible with German Freya and Würzburg radar systems. The design philosophy was similar to British IFF. Aircraft transponders responded to radar interrogations with coded pulses that identified them as friendly. PED IFF to solve the friendly fire problem. The Germans developed FUG-25 for the same reason. The British then exploited weaknesses in the German system with perfectos. The Germans responded by turning off transponders, accepting the friendly fire risk to avoid being tracked. The British improved their interrogation systems to be more secure. The cycle of measure and countermeasure continued throughout the war. American forces adopted British IFF technology through the Tizard mission in 1940. This scientific exchange brought British radar and IFF technology to the United States, jump-starting American development. The U.S. Naval Research Laboratory had been working on its own IFF system but decided to adopt the British Mark III design to ensure interoperability with RAF systems. American manufacturers built transponders compatible with British equipment, allowing Allied aircraft to be identified by both British and American radar installations. The United States also developed IFF Mark IV, an enhanced version that operated at higher frequencies around 600 MHz. This allowed smaller antennas and improved performance. Mark IV used separate interrogation and response frequencies like Mark III, but added additional security features and coding capabilities. By late in the war, Mark IV was becoming standard for American forces, though Mark III remained widely used to maintain compatibility with British systems. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The operational use of IFF was more complex than simply turning on the transponder and forgetting about it. Crews had to understand when to use IFF and when to turn it off. The basic rule was simple. Use IFF when flying over friendly territory or friendly controlled waters. Turn it off when approaching enemy territory. But the application of this rule varied with circumstances. Bombers flying deep into Germany would turn off their transponders well before reaching the coast to avoid giving German defenses early warning. Fighters escorting bombers might leave transponders on longer to help with formation keeping and to allow friendly radar to track the raid's progress. The problem was that, in the confusion of combat, pilots sometimes forgot to turn transponders on or off at the appropriate time. Aircraft returning from missions over enemy territory sometimes approached friendly radar installations with transponders still off. Radar operators could not confirm these were friendly aircraft. Fighter controllers had to decide whether to scramble interceptors against potentially friendly returning bombers or risk allowing enemy aircraft to penetrate defenses. The wrong decision either wasted fighter resources or endangered returning crews. There were also cases where Allied transponders were triggered by enemy radar. In the Pacific theater, American forces discovered that Japanese radar systems operating on certain frequencies could trigger IFF Mark III transponders. Field units reported that their transponders were responding constantly when near Japanese-held territory, essentially broadcasting their presence to the enemy. This was exactly the vulnerability the British had feared with earlier IFF versions. The solution was to turn transponders off when within range of Japanese radar, but this created the same friendly fire risks the Germans experienced. The destruct charges fitted to transponders caused their own problems. Some charges detonated during heavy landings, destroying the equipment unnecessarily. In one documented case, a crew member testing the impact switch accidentally triggered the destruct charge, causing an explosion inside the aircraft. The charges were later modified to require deliberate activation except in extreme crash conditions. But crews were still instructed to destroy IFF equipment before abandoning aircraft in enemy territory, adding another task to the already stressful process of evacuating a damaged plane. Despite its limitations and complications, IFF significantly reduced friendly fire incidents compared to radar operations without identification capability. The system was not perfect. Equipment failures occurred regularly. Pilots forgot procedures. Codes were sometimes set incorrectly. But when functioning properly, IFF gave radar operators confidence that detected aircraft were friendly, allowing air defense systems to concentrate on genuine threats. The technology saved thousands of lives by preventing fratricide while enabling more effective air defense. The evolution of IFF during the war showed how quickly technology adapted to combat needs. The Mark I system of 1939 was experimental and barely functional. The Mark III system of 1942 was reliable, secure, and widely deployed. By 1944, enhanced versions were being developed with better security and more information capacity. The progression from concept to operational deployment to refinement happened in just 5 years, driven by the urgent need to solve the identification problem. The human element was always present. No matter how sophisticated the technology, it required people to operate, maintain, and trust it. Radar operators had to learn to recognize IFF responses on their screens and distinguish them from other signals. Pilots had to remember to turn transponders on and off appropriately. Maintenance crews had to keep temperamental vacuum tube equipment functioning in challenging conditions. Intelligence officers had to protect codes and procedures from enemy exploitation. Each person in the chain had to execute their responsibilities correctly for the system to work. The title's claim that Germans never knew about American IFF transponders is demonstrably false. German intelligence was aware of Allied IFF systems from relatively early in the war. They monitored transmissions, examined captured equipment, and interrogated prisoners. What Germans perhaps did not fully appreciate initially was the extent of IFF deployment, that virtually every Allied aircraft carried transponders by mid-war. But they certainly knew the systems existed and understood their basic function. More accurately, the intelligence war around IFF was characterized by each side knowing significant amounts about the other systems while still attempting to protect specific technical details and operational procedures. The British knew about FUG-25 and built perfectos to exploit it. The Germans knew about Mark III and attempted to monitor its transmissions for intelligence. Both sides knew the other side knew, leading to a complex game of security measures and countermeasures. The legacy of World War II IFF extends far beyond the war itself. The technology developed for military identification became the foundation of modern air traffic control. After the war, the International Civil Aviation Organization adopted modified military IFF technology as the basis for civilian secondary surveillance radar. The transponders in every commercial airliner today descend directly from the Mark X system, which itself evolved from wartime Mark III and IV designs. The interrogation and response concept, the use of separate frequencies, the coded signals, all originated in the urgent need to identify aircraft during the war. Modern military IFF is vastly more sophisticated than World War II systems, using encryption, secure channels, and integration with computer networks. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. An interrogator asks, "Are you friendly?" And a transponder automatically responds with identifying information. The technology that prevented Spitfires from shooting down Blenheims in 1939 evolved into systems that prevent modern fighters from destroying friendly aircraft and that enable air traffic controllers to manage thousands of flights daily. The friendly fire problem that drove IFF development was never completely solved. Even with identification systems, aircraft were sometimes shot down by their own side. Equipment failures, pilot errors, communication breakdowns, and the chaos of combat continued to cause fratricide throughout the war and beyond. But IFF reduced the problem significantly. Without it, the friendly fire rate would have been catastrophically higher. The technology represents one of the war's quiet achievements, not dramatic like radar or computers, but essential to making air operations feasible. The engineers who developed IFF worked under tremendous pressure. They had to create reliable electronic equipment using 1940s technology, vacuum tubes, discrete components, mechanical switches. They had to make it compact enough to fit in aircraft where space and weight were precious. They had to make it robust enough to function in temperature extremes, vibration, and electrical interference. They had to make it secure against enemy exploitation. And they had to deploy it quickly enough to matter in a fast-moving war. That they succeeded in all these goals was remarkable. The pilots and aircrew who used IFF mostly took it for granted. It was just another piece of equipment to check during pre-flight, another switch to manage during missions. They trusted that it worked, that it would identify them to friendly radar, that it would help prevent being shot down by their own side. That trust was usually justified. The systems worked well enough that crews could focus on their primary missions rather than constantly worrying about being misidentified. The technology faded into the background, performing its function quietly and reliably. The radar operators who relied on IFF had a different perspective. They saw the coded responses appear on their screens and knew those blips represented friendly aircraft. They could vector fighters to intercept genuine threats rather than wasting resources investigating friendly contacts. They could watch bomber streams depart for targets and monitor their return, using IFF to distinguish returning bombers from intruding enemy aircraft. The technology gave them confidence in their assessments and enabled more effective air defense. The intelligence analysts who tracked enemy IFF gained insight into enemy operations. By monitoring when and where German transponders transmitted, British intelligence could track Luftwaffe deployment patterns and activity levels. By analyzing the codes used, they could sometimes identify specific units or aircraft types. The Perfecto's exploitation of FUG-25 provided tactical intelligence that helped British night fighters find and destroy German night fighters. The intelligence dimension of IFF was as important as its identification function. The story of IFF illustrates a larger truth about World War II technology. The conflict drove innovation at unprecedented speed. Technologies that might have taken decades to develop in peacetime were created, tested, and deployed in months or years. The urgency of war eliminated bureaucratic obstacles and focused resources on solving critical problems. IFF exemplifies this accelerated innovation, from concept in 1939 to widespread deployment by 1943, solving a problem that threatened to cripple air operations. The international cooperation around IFF was also significant. The British shared their technology with America through the Tizard mission, one of the most important technology transfers of the war. American manufacturers built equipment to British specifications to ensure interoperability. Commonwealth nations adopted British systems. The Allies maintained compatible IFF across multiple air forces operating in multiple theaters. This cooperation enabled combined operations and prevented friendly fire between Allied forces. It showed how technology could facilitate alliance coordination. The question posed by the title, whether Germans knew about American IFF transponders, has a nuanced answer. Yes, German intelligence knew Allied aircraft used IFF transponders. They understood the general principles of operation. They monitored transmissions and captured equipment. But they may not have known specific details like exact code sequences, interrogation timing, or response formats. They certainly did not have complete access to Allied IFF procedures and security measures. The knowledge was real but incomplete, sufficient to understand the threat but not to fully exploit or counter it. The reality of IFF in World War II was that it was one technology among many in a war characterized by rapid technological change. It was important but not decisive. It saved lives but did not win battles. It solved one problem while creating new complications. It represented both engineering achievement and operational compromise. The system was good enough to be useful while remaining imperfect enough to require constant attention and improvement. The men who died in friendly fire incidents despite IFF are part of the technology story. The Blenheim crews shot down on the war's first day died before IFF was operational. But others died throughout the war even with IFF deployed. Equipment failed. Pilots made errors. Confusion created situations where identification was impossible. The technology reduced losses but could not eliminate them. Each death was a reminder that no system was perfect and that war's chaos could defeat the best technology. The lessons learned from wartime IFF influenced post-war development. Military and civilian aviation authorities recognized that positive identification was essential for safety and security. They invested in improved systems, better training, and more robust procedures. The mistakes and successes of wartime IFF informed better designs. The technology evolved from wartime expedient to peacetime standard, incorporating lessons purchased with the lives of those killed by friendly fire. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.